Hello and welcome to Chicanime. My name is Lauren and today I am going to be looking at a AniNews video. This is about Mare. So this is part of the Aura and Mare sort of playlist, I suppose. I think they might have been out of order on the playlist that I have. But anyway, it doesn't really matter. I don't think I missed too much. So we're going to find out about Mare this time. Last time we found out about Aura. So, look, I don't know. I'm looking forward to it. It's been fun. Oh, dear. Oh, I'm all the way over there. Fun. Fun. Not sure exactly what's going on with some of the camera work today. Should have checked some stuff. Anyway, no further ado. Let us find out about Mare.
How strong are Aura and Mare Bellofiore? Well, that's more of a two-parter question because Aura and Mare don't quite have the same build. Like, Mare is an extremely powerful spellcaster whose strength is said to rival even Shaltir's for the title of strongest floor guardian, while
Druid,
Aura is a
right?
very skilled ranger and beast tamer who can bring the most vicious of creatures under her command. So I think it'd be best to talk about their builds separately.
Okay.
And
Yeah,
who
so I definitely watched these two out of order, but oh well.
better to start off with than the timid younger brother, Mare, the unreliable disciple of nature. But first, this video is sponsored by Kurtzspell, a
Why
free-to-play
unreliable?
3D
He does a good
third-person
job.
anime-inspired PvE and PvP battle arena game. And as I said the last time I promoted them, this game is actually fun as hell.
I have my
Not
coffee
only does
with
it
me
look
today.
great with its anime-styled graphics and animation, but
We gotta
it
get that
also
caffeine,
blends so
baby.
well with the fantasy world that it's based in. Almost like it's an extension of the Ruby universe. Not to mention that with its custom character
I watch
creation
Ruby?
system, you too can also design your favorite anime girl.
Like
Or
our
guy. Yeah,
WBY
that's an
or
option
whatever.
too.
I
Then
watched
the combat
like
is
one
also
episode or
very
two
fleshed
when I
out,
was like
as
14.
moves and attacks flow seamlessly into each other, providing
My
for a lot
friend
of combo opportunities.
said it was really good.
Which means that in both PvP and PvE, you have to be versatile with how you approach your enemy.
So
especially
honestly,
in
I am just
online
gonna skip
battles.
this, I think.
Luckily for my PvP matches, I somewhat knew what I
Oh,
was
now
doing,
it's almost
so
over.
we were able
It's just
to
like
clutch out
usually
the
I
win.
don't skip these.
Anyway, the game is in early access right now on
sponsorships,
Steam,
even though
and
this
the
is
devs
so
are constantly
old.
improving
So it's
upon
like
what's
a
already
lot
there.
of these
I
really
think it's
old
safe to say that you can
creator
definitely
codes
expect
are
a
no
lot more
longer
things from this game.
there, and sometimes
so
the
I
game
highly
is no
recommend
longer
using
there.
the link in the description to try it out. Now, let's get back to the video. Mare and Aura are a type of elf known as a dark elf, a race of humanoid beings similar to the wood elves that are common in fantasy games. In traditional stories, elves were short creatures with pointy ears. Think Santa's Little Helpers. But elves in modern fantasy RPGs, including the fictional MMO Yggdrasil from Overlord, are often styled after the mythos constructed by
Yup.
J.R.R.
J.R.R. Tolkien
They are
changed the
beings
world
that are
with his
just as
tall,
tall as
hot
humans,
elves.
but also more agile, slender, and beautiful. And they have a graceful and noble culture that is at one with nature and magic. Many of these traits were adopted by tabletop role-playing games like Dungeons & Dragons, then made their way onto early computer RPGs like Ultima and Baldur's Gate. They eventually became a mainstay of the genre when they were implemented in
I do keep forgetting that the fact that Baldur's Gate 3 just came out does mean that there's a Baldur's Gate and a Baldur's Gate 2. I just forgot that that is a thing until literally this very second when he showed the original Baldur's Gate. I'm an idiot.
fantasy MMORPGs like World of Warcraft. But
I'm okay with that,
specifically
though.
in Dungeons & Dragons and other Western fantasy RPGs, Dark Elves are sometimes evil elf variants, also known as Drow.
Drow.
They normally make their homes underground or inside caves and tunnels rather
Yes,
than
the
in
Underdog.
trees and forests like their wood elf relatives. However, in Japanese fantasy fiction, Dark Elves are more often just dark-skinned elves, with no major cultural or personality distinctions to regular elves. Sometimes they can live in deserts or other hot, arid climates which tan their skin. But
I feel
more
like in Norse mythology it's sort of similar, like the Svartalfheim, like they've got the Svartalfs, right? There's the dark elves, they're the dark elves, then you have the Losfar. Oh my god. It's a hard word to say. It's LJ. Losfar and the Svartalfar, and those are like different. They're like they're not, one of them isn't good and beautiful and one is ugly and and evil, right? They're just like, some of them live more underground and some of them live above ground, and that's like kind of the main difference.
More often than
I
not,
think.
they
It's been a
resemble
long time since
dwarves,
I've looked
just
into
like their
Norse
lighter-skinned counterparts. They just happen to have a darker complexion for some reason.
Yeah,
Though
use
it's
those
not clear which
dark
variant that
cartridges.
Maruyama, the author of Overlord, borrowed more heavily from. Now, their appearance is styled after a typical Japanese dark elf, with a slightly more brownish tan. A fun fact though, it's said in the novels that the Great Forest of Tob, which lies near Nazarick, was once populated by dark elves. So, using this information, dark elves don't appear to be subterranean creatures, at least not in the world of Overlord, placing Aura and Mare farther from the idea of them being a typical Western dark elf. But as we discussed in
Which
the
is
last
kinda fun.
video, Aura and Mare are quite evil by nature.
Yeah.
And while this may be a result of Buku Buku Chagama's decision to give them a negative karma rating, it could also be that Dark Elves and Maruyama's Overlord are an inherently evil race by nature. Speaking of race, the Elvish one is classified as humanoid in Yggdrasil. Therefore,
It is fun to see like an evil character though who is not brooding and like that. It's like they're actually really like they're happy and bubbly and having a great effing time. It's just the things that make them have the best time are really terrible for everybody else. And I just find that a fun thing to explore in something like Overlord. It's an enjoyable character.
elves can't gain any racial levels, unlike the majority of denizens of Nazarick, who
Oh.
are either demi-human or heteromorphic.
Interesting.
As such, the humanoid races tend to come with fewer and smaller advantages and disadvantages. Their weaknesses weren't extremely obvious and easily exploitable like the heteromorphs, and their buffs merely boosted their capabilities and powers. This made them far more versatile and easier to play.
Fun.
Heteromorphs though could be much stronger, but at the same time, very vulnerable to a prepared enemy. Take for example the undead's many weaknesses to healing, holy attacks, and cleric's undead turning. Now, since Yggdrasil
unless you're
borrowed
powerful enough, I guess like Ainz has all of those things that allow him to like ignore those, but that's just him.
so much from Dungeons & Dragons, it makes sense to talk about how elves and dark elves work in that game, as it more than likely relates to Mare and Aura's inherent abilities.
Let's see.
So basically, both types of elves are generally more agile but less tough than other humanoids.
Yeah. So like for me, I play a half elf in one of my campaigns, so it's just like we've got dark vision, so you can see further in the dark. Dex scores are automatically raised. Like there's a couple of the ability scores that are automatically given to you if you choose elf, and like dexterity is one of them. I feel like charisma is one of them, and wisdom. So like you automatically get started with a couple of higher stats, which is great, especially for a beginning player.
They gain a bonus to dexterity, which is their ability to hit enemies with ranged attacks or dodge out of the way of certain attacks
Yes,
and
it
various
is.
spells. In exchange, they get a penalty to what's called Constitution,
Yeah.
something that affects their ability to resist certain effects like poison and disease.
Well, it depends too. So it's like my con is 0, right? So there's been a couple of instances in our campaign where I am the only one who is affected by like the heat of the desert or something, because everybody else gets pluses, or in my campaign got pluses to their cons, or they just rolled higher than me. I just also did badly on those rolls, but like I don't have any advantages with Constitution saving throws, and then but I have advantages against people trying to use like charms, like they can't charm me. And I can't be put to sleep with magic. So there's like, you get a couple of little perks like that for being an elf. But yeah, I am the squishiest person on our team. My AC is pretty bad. Actually, it's not terrible for my character. It's 14, which isn't great because mostly people hit me if I'm too close to them. But I hang out high in the trees because again, my dex is really high, so my ranged attacks are really good.
As well as reduces their overall health pool. Neither type of
I have
elves
the
sleep,
least amount of
and
hit
thus they
points,
can't be
too.
put to sleep with magic or poison. Their minds are sharper too, making
I'm like a level 7 or something, and I've got like 69 hit points, 68 hit points. No, I think I have 59 hit points and I'm level 7. And that's not great.
them slightly more difficult to bewitch or control with magic spells.
See, that's what I
On
said.
top of this, their sight and hearing are even more powerful,
My
meaning they can
perception
hear
is good.
sneaking foes, spot hiding enemies, or search for secret doors and hidden treasures much more easily.
Yep.
Then, Dark Elves have a selection of additional abilities over and above their basic Elven counterparts. To start with, they're actually more intelligent and charismatic, making them better at being spellcasters and clerics. They gain a special supernatural defense known as spell resistance, which gives them a good chance to outright ignore the effects of any spell, with the exact chance being based on their level and how powerful the enemy spellcaster is. Furthermore, their minds are even more resistant to influence and control than elves, and they gain a further bonus to all mind-altering attacks.
That's really cool.
These include the indirect ones like illusions, as well as effects that aren't technically spells, like psychic abilities.
Ooh.
Then, they also have access to a few relatively simple, weak spells, mostly revolving around the creation of magical light and darkness, though those can only be used once a day. Dark vision is also an ability that they have, which allows them to always see up to around 120 feet in any direction, even in pitch-black darkness. As creatures who are sometimes born and live in caves,
I get 60 for my character, and it's like grayscale, so like it goes to like colorblind vision, but you can see for 60 feet.
Where there is no natural source of light, this was pretty essential to functioning. Incidentally, this is also why their eyes glow in a dim light, like certain nocturnal animals. Though this ability to see in the dark normally comes with a cost, as in they're easily blinded by bright light sources. Regardless, it wouldn't be surprising if Aura and Mare possessed all of these additional advantages, but ultimately, we only know for a fact that they possess dark vision, assumed to be without any supposed bright light weaknesses. I mean, they don't appear to demonstrate any difficulty seeing outdoors during bright sunny days. And as floor guardians of floor 6, they would be spending the majority of their time in a brightly lit coliseum on a floor with a functioning day-night cycle. Overall though, as elves, they're likely more resistant than their humanoid counterparts to various types of mind-altering spells. But since Dark Elves are a humanoid race, they don't have racial levels, meaning in Yggdrasil, all of their advantages and bonuses wouldn't be that much better than any of the other humanoid races, including their fellow elves. It would seem that both elves and dark elves most likely gain a slight boost to their observation abilities, especially thanks to their good vision, and then they may be more resistant to certain kinds of spells. But they don't have any particularly powerful abilities or weaknesses like the other races that we've discussed in this series so far. We also know very little about their classes, but as usual, that's not going to stop us. It's still enough to speculate a little bit.
Lots of speculation.
And of course, we can always rely on the fact that Maruyama borrowed heavily from Dungeons & Dragons in order to give us a bit of an idea. So, as I said in the beginning, let's start with the younger brother of the two, Mare. Mare's class archetype is actually that of a Druid. Specifically, he has 10 levels in Druid, 10 levels in High Druid, 10 levels in Nature's Herald, 5 levels in Disciple of Disaster,
What is Disciple of Disaster?
in
Does that mean that like he can bring disasters? Is that what that means? As opposed to like just chaos? Just like he can just bring, he creates the disaster. That's what I'm gonna go with.
With another 55 levels unaccounted for. And although we mentioned this in a prior video involving one of the 5 worst, Druid is a class that specializes in nature-related spells. Usually nature-themed buffs, controlling plants, manipulating the earth, and summoning and controlling various animals. The word itself comes from a kind of high-ranking priest from ancient Celtic religions. It became quite popular in fantasy fiction and video games to signify divine spellcasters whose powers, unlike clerics, were not derived from a god but rather nature itself. They had various capabilities, depending on how high of a level you were. You could befriend wild animals, recruit an animal companion to fight in battle with you, move through restrictive or dangerous terrain with ease, gain bonuses to specific nature-related skills, have immunity to being tracked, resistance to spells cast by fairies, immunity to poisons, or even have the ability to moderately adjust your appearance at will. That being said though, the author of Overlord did list Albedo, Demiurge, and Sibas as the only 3 NPCs with the ability to actively transform as a class ability, which would suggest that Druids in Overlord, or at least Mare's version of Druid, doesn't share this capability with their D&D cousins.
I've been listening to a lot of Critical Role, and you know we've got a Druid in that one, and honestly, Keyleth is just so OP. It's kind of crazy. So it's probably best that they didn't keep some of those aspects over here, because like as like a level 17 or whatever Druid, that's crazy powerful.
Similarly, most of these other class capabilities haven't even been confirmed in Overlord, so it's possible that Druids in Yggdrasil may not have even had most of these special abilities. It's just something to keep in mind so that you know what's not outside of the realm of possibility.
Okay.
What we do know is that he does have animal companions, specifically a pair of extremely high-level dragons, one of which he and Aura rode into Jerkniv's capital city on. These dragons were obtained from one of Yggdrasil's gacha games, which, if you weren't aware, is basically Japan's version of loot boxes. Yggdrasil's monetization scheme was notoriously exploitative, and it was possible to spend money on these gacha lotteries to obtain various in-game benefits like gear or creatures. I mean, it was practically pay to win. But back to the ability itself. In Dungeons & Dragons, Rangers and Druids could only have regular animals as companions, with the strength of the animal dependent on the level of the character. A high-level player might have a wolf, tiger, or dinosaur, while a low-level player might have a dog, eagle, or snake.
Okay, but like, can you then upgrade? Like, if you get a creature, a companion, as like a lower level, can you then, as you raise in level, can you raise your creature in level? Or does that one just stay wherever it's at?
It wasn't meant to be a full-on class feature, just a nice little bonus that made the classes seem more nature-oriented. Yggdrasil, on the other hand, as it usually does, seems to make this skill much more powerful, allowing it to apply to much more powerful, high-level magical beasts, like dragons, and also apparently allowing 2 rather than just 1 companion.
Yeah, that's kind of nuts.
The recruitment probably wouldn't work against anything too humanoid, particularly any playable race, as well as anything that was too monstrous. That means things like angels, demons, slimes, constructs, undead, and giants are all probably out. It might work on plant creatures, fairies, or elementals, but that's also not a guarantee. Think animals, dragons, or things that kind of look like animals, like the Barghest from Season 3. Now, the most important class ability of Druids, and the one that we see most prominently in Overlord, is their robust selection of nature-related spells. While it's not been specified exactly what kind of spells that Mare might specialize in, we can speculate a good deal on what that may be. For instance, we've seen him use some kind of earthquake-esque spell on screen to kill a bunch of Jerkniv's royal guard.
Pretty good.
This, likely being the earthquake spell, affects an 80-foot radius around the designated origin point, and it causes intense tremors, which produces various effects dependent upon the terrain.
And all those
in
men
a city,
failed their deck
buildings
saves.
and tunnels would collapse, trapping and crushing characters caught inside them. On open terrain, fissures in the earth expand, and anyone who doesn't react fast enough can fall inside and also get crushed. If you're in a body of water, these fissures would form whirlpools, pulling creatures down to the bottom and possibly drowning them. Muddy terrains likewise turns to quicksand and pulls characters in, though it's not a very good spell against high-level characters, because the potency of the attack doesn't scale much at all with your character level. However, it is a very efficient and effective spell for killing large groups of weaklings.
And if you, even if you just kind of do like a lesser version of it and like you just change the terrain for people, even if it's not going to kill them necessarily, that could be useful to like make them stuck, you know, to give them disadvantage on movement, to give you and your team advantage. I like this plan of turning mud into quicksand. That's a good idea. I'm stealing it.
We also know that he has the 6th level terrain manipulation spell called Earth Surge, which functions very similarly to the 6th level D&D spell Move Earth. This spell can't affect rock, but it can move dirt and other loose earth substances like clay and sand as if it were a very sluggish and viscous wave of liquid. The overall reach of the change allowed one to move an area of earth that was approximately 150 feet in length and width into whatever shape that the caster wanted every 10 minutes or so. Of course, assuming that the end result was something that would remain structurally stable after the effect had ended. Those end results would typically be a smoothly curving hill or a flat plain. It doesn't violently break the ground like an earthquake, nor is it quick enough to trap or bury creatures like quicksand. In fact, structures, creatures, and other objects that occupy the terrain, such as trees, are mostly unaffected, magically shifting up or down with the surface of the terrain. In Yggdrasil, the exact area of effect might be different, but apparently, Mare is able to affect a distance of around 350 feet across, or just over 100 meters. Though, at the time that he was noted doing that, he was also using one of his class skills. Regardless though, the rough effect of moving Earth remains the same. Mare also may have been responsible for the 6th tier weather manipulation spell called Control Weather, the one that we saw Nazarick use to intimidate the Lizardmen back in Season 2. This allows the caster to freely manipulate all aspects of the weather, producing powerful effects like tornadoes, thunderstorms,
Cool.
heat waves, torrential.
I think I remember that, and I thought I assumed Demiurge was doing it with some kind of magic, but it does make sense that they'd work together a little bit more than I was kind of giving them credit for.
Rain, hailstorms, sleet, fog, blizzards, flash frost, and so on, as well as allows you to remove these effects and produce more mild ones like overcast or sunny days. But that's yet to be confirmed. It just fits most accordingly with Mare's build. Now, one interesting facet of druids that's commonly found in D&D but we haven't really talked about was that they're also very skilled at fighting. Many of their spells were traditional buff spells, and like I said, druids in Dungeons & Dragons would often combine these with their transformation ability to make themselves extremely powerful. Yggdrasil doesn't have transformations per se, but it's possible druids are meant to be better warriors than spellcasters. The reason I propose this is because Mare's base stats are actually extremely well balanced. As a matter of fact, he has some of the highest stats total amongst all the known NPCs, tied with Albedo at 690. This puts him below only one other NPC whose stats are actually known, Sheltir, at 732.
And then there's
that
the
said,
other one.
Gargantua's is even higher, placing his stats at the highest of all the NPCs. Similarly, Rubetto probably had even better stats than that. Aside from that though,
I said Regato or something. I was close. Look, I remembered there was the other one who was tall, like stronger, and you know what? That is what you should praise me for.
While Mare's physical attack is still a bit lower than his magical attack, he might still make for a decent hybrid character if he buffs himself with some abilities. I mean, even with his appearance making him look like some kind of wizard with just a cloth armor dress skirt and a staff, he's not nearly as weak or squishy as you might think. Now, what about the rest of his classes? So, we've explained Druid for the most part, and Higher Druid is probably just a higher tier upgrade of that, enhancing all Druid related powers and granting access to higher leveled spells. But what about Nature's Herald? That one seems a bit interesting.
That sounds like the Lorax. You know, you speak for the trees. You're the Herald.
Term for the messenger of a king or monarch, essentially fulfilling the role of a modern ambassador or a diplomat. It also has some religious connotations. In Christianity, for instance, God is said to employ many different angels as his heralds. Herald, especially as a class, is usually used in this religious connotation for most different fantasy RPGs.
I suddenly remembered that song.
Clerics, for instance, could communicate directly to their gods and be given instructions, some of which would be to act as heralds in order to give others instructions or blessings. And with Druid magic being classified as divine magic, one that's powered by the Druid's spiritual communion with the natural world, it's likely that Nature's Herald improves upon the more cleric-like abilities of Druids, mainly their healing and buffing spells, making them stronger, more potent and effective, less costly, and granting access to better variations. One of Mare's known buff spells is actually called the Power of Gaia, Gaia being the Greek pantheon, the personification of planet Earth as a primordial goddess, which explains why it might be a fitting spell for a Herald of Nature to use. And it seems to be a spell that provides some kind of strength enhancement. It's also likely that her main AoE healing spells also come from this class. Then we have the Forest Mage class, which is also pretty interesting. It really just does sound like a synonym for Druid, doesn't it?
Yes.
But Druids weren't just focused on plants or trees. Rather, it was all of nature, including things like oceans, mountains, the sky, deserts, and so on. They even had influence over the primal elements of earth, fire, water, and air.
They can call like elementals and stuff and become the elementals, and like they can do all sorts of. And again, some of it is mostly of what I know about druids in D&D is 100% critical role stuff. Like it's just because I'm currently listening to the first campaign of Critical Role, and so like Keyleth is like right here in my brain. So I don't know how much of it is just because she's super powerful or because of what her journey as a druid is and how much of it other druids can do, but it's OP. And it sounds like a lot of work, so that's why I don't want to be a druid ever in a campaign, I don't think. It just seems like there's so much to know, so much to remember. It's a lot.
In light of this fact, a Forest Mage might just be a derivative class of Druid that focuses on enhancing and broadening their plant-related abilities.
Or like favored
After
terrain
all,
in a
Buku Buku Chagama had written in his bio that Mare liked plants, so perhaps she gave him this as a compliment to that bit of flavor text. As for its abilities, perhaps this class allows him to summon plant creatures, bind his enemies with vines, or maybe even animate trees and other plant-like creatures to fight for him. It seems to also be useful for utility. In D&D, there exists a druid spell called Tree Stride, which allows the caster to enter into a tree and exit out of another one that's hundreds or thousands of feet away, giving the ability to jump repeatedly between trees a number of times based on the caster's skill.
Yeah, except for I think that's usually like it's a high level spell slot, so you probably don't want to use it too often every day, but
Mare has a buff spell called Woodland Stride, which seems to be used to increase the target's mobility and maybe even provide a similar effect. Or it might just increase the user's running speed over woodland terrain.
Ignore difficult terrain.
Regardless, whether offensive, defensive, or utility, there are likely many plant or wood-related spells that are probably the providence of forest mages. And finally, Mare has a class known as Disciple of Disaster.
Yes, I want to know what this one is.
Sounds suspiciously similar to Obert Elaine Odal's signature class, World Disaster, which was a secret class that you could only get by killing its previous owner. And it allowed the user to use large amounts of MP to power up their spells way past their normal limit, granting the ability to deal massive quantities of damage in an extremely short period of time.
So sort of like
now,
a one and done,
this class might not be as secret as World Disaster, and it may not even bear any similarities in function to each other, but the name does suggest that it provides extremely destructive, powerful abilities. So what exactly could it be referring to?
Again, my assumption is
think about it.
Is this holo? Like, I always think that this little guy is holo, but other people have said it might not be. So I don't know who is this. It's just the color scheme and the look of the vest and like the fact that she's got little ears. Anyway, somebody tell me who this little guy is. I always just assumed it was holo. But no, my point is my Disciple of Disaster guess was that they are almost like, say, taking a second level in like Paladin, where where your god would be interested in causing disasters, so you are a disciple of causing those disasters. My first thought was like, wait a minute, so like you're a walking disaster, like you're just falling out, like tripping all over yourself all the time. But no, I think it's you cause the disasters. If you were to worship a god, it would be natural disasters.
What do you get when you combine nature with disaster? Well, you get a natural disaster. Yep, it's our theory that this class powers up some of the more destructive abilities in the Druid's repertoire, specifically the ones that produce natural disasters like earthquakes, lightning storms, whirlwinds, and so on.
I like it.
So that's literally everything about Mare's classes.
Except for you haven't told me what unreliable means. I really want to, what does that mean? Okay, because if he doesn't tell me what unreliable means, I need someone to tell me in the comments what that means. Why is Mare unreliable?
Finish off this power profile by looking at his selection of weapons. Mare's go-to piece of equipment is his staff, a divine class weapon called the Shadow of Yggdrasil. Yggdrasil, aside from being the name of the video game that Heinz was playing, is actually a reference to the world tree in Norse mythology. It's said to be the origin of the universe itself. In the game world, this idea was adopted into the lore. The 9 playable servers in the game are the 9 remaining leaves on the world tree. All other leaves were either eaten by the World Eater or fell from the tree and turned into world items. Incidentally, this is why world items are called, well, world items. They are literally as powerful as an entire world. In any case, the Shadow of Yggdrasil would presumably be an item that was derived from this world tree in some way. It's probably not an actual branch of the tree itself, as that would make it about as powerful as a world item, which it isn't. Rather, perhaps it could be seeds or leaves of Yggdrasil that fell and sprouted newer, smaller trees in its shadow. Thus the name Shadow of Yggdrasil, a divine class item that is but a small portion of a much larger world-class tree. Aside from this cool lore theory, we really don't know much about it other than its use in bashing in people's knees or creating earthquakes. Staffs in Yggdrasil worked much like Dungeons & Dragons, in that they could be used to cast spells like a scroll or wand, except the user could select from a much larger selection of spells, not just one. Additionally, in a feature exclusive to Yggdrasil, they also improved the user's spellcasting ability. They weren't actually necessary to cast the spells, but they would make them much more powerful.
So acting like a focus.
Then, though not exactly Mare's personal possession, she has been seen to wear the pair of gauntlets called Avarice and Generosity, an actual world item, ranking it as one of the most powerful pieces of equipment in the game for its practically game-breaking abilities. It's one of the few world items that was
Mare's though a druid though, so like he's got these. That makes sense. You give somebody who's that OP the very OP items, because they're one of the only people who can use it.
Obtained by the guild Ainz Ul Gown. This particular one had the dual ability of creating and administering XP. The Black Gauntlet, Avarice, absorbed the souls of slain creatures and converted it into XP. Then the White Gauntlet, Generosity, gave the user the ability to use that XP to power any spell that they wanted, including the most powerful ones like Ainz's Wish or various resurrection spells.
Oh,
It was very useful for players who were already at the highest level. It allowed them to stockpile large quantities of experience, giving them a pool of XP that wouldn't take away from their current level. That said, it might require the user to actually be the one to kill the enemy in order to absorb any souls, because in the light novel, we aren't actually told how these gauntlets manage to absorb anything. And that brings us to the end of everything that you need to know about Mare's build, powers, abilities, and equipment. He may not be the strongest in Nazarick, but he is definitely a top-tier spellcaster. And it's a shame that we've only seen so little of his potential abilities.
Agreed.
I'm sure there's a good reason as to why Ainz always brings him along whenever he's about to engage an enemy. But oh well, guess we just gotta wait for the next unfortunate army to approach.
Especially because he's called unreliable. What does that mean?
Gates. Now, before I go, I'd like to thank Kurtzspell for sponsoring this video. Once again, I thoroughly enjoyed playing this game, and if you're the least bit interested, then I highly recommend checking it out using the link in the description. Anyway, as always, thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this type of anime content, then you already know what to do.
Yeah.
So, until next time, ciao!
Ciao! That was fun. Again, there's still a few things that I would like to know, but I'm sure people will let me know about that in the comments below. So, yeah. That's the AniNews video for the week. Next time we'll be either looking at another Machis TV video or what are Aura and Mare's true combat potential and roles. I'm kind of going back and forth between a few. Maybe I'll go back to a Zoronic Kaiba video. I haven't done one of those in a while. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. Let me know what else I should look at in the comments below. And yeah, I will see you then. Bye.